The trees close in around you like prison walls. You're part of the greatest army the world has ever known, the Roman legions. Trained, disciplined, unstoppable. Or so you thought. But what if I told you that here, in this very forest, Rome, the empire that conquered nations and crushed kings, was about to be humiliated like never before? 3 entire legions. Over 20,000 men. Gone. Not in some distant war with Persia, not in the deserts of Africa, but right here in the heart of Europe, wiped out by tribes Rome dismissed as barbarians. And at the center of this disaster? Betrayal. A man Rome trusted, a man raised as one of their own, who would lure them into the woods like sheep led to slaughter. This isn't just a story about swords and shields. It's about arrogance, ambition, and how one mistake can change the fate of empires forever. Stay with me, because once you hear how the Battle of Teutoburg Forest unfolded, you'll understand why historians still call it Rome's greatest defeat. For centuries, Rome expanded like wildfire. From the coasts of North Africa to the hills of Greece, from Spain to the Middle East, the eagle banners of the legions marched further and further, swallowing kingdoms into the empire. And in 9 CE, their eyes turned toward the untamed wilderness of Germania. To the Romans, Germania was wild, uncivilized, and dangerous. But it was also tempting. Conquer Germania, and Rome would push its borders beyond the Rhine, securing vast new lands, resources, and glory for the empire. At least that was the plan. The man in charge of carrying out this plan was Publius Quinctilius Varus. A seasoned politician and general, Varus believed Germania could be tamed just like every other province. What he didn't realize was that the tribes of Germania weren't like Rome's usual enemies. They weren't united under a king. They weren't bound by cities or walls. They were scattered, fierce, and waiting for the right moment to strike. And they had found their leader, Arminius, a man raised by Rome, trained in their ways, and even granted Roman citizenship. To Varus, he was a loyal ally. To the Germanic tribes, he was a hero returning home. It was Arminius who would set the trap. It was Arminius who would lure Varus and 3 legions into the shadowy depths of the Teutoburg Forest. And it was Arminius who would prove that Rome's greatest strength, its discipline and confidence, could also be its greatest weakness. In this story, we'll walk step by step into the forest alongside those doomed legions. We'll see the betrayal unfold, feel the panic as order collapsed, and watch how a single battle reshaped the destiny of Rome. So let's begin, at the edge of the Rhine, where arrogance marched headfirst into an ambush centuries in the making. The legions began their march eastward under heavy skies. Germania was not Rome. There were no sun-drenched roads like in Italy, no marble cities, no markets buzzing with trade. Instead, the land stretched out like an untamed beast. Dense forests, endless swamps, and rolling hills that seemed to go on forever. Every step forward meant sinking into mud. Every breath carried the damp, earthy scent of pine and rain. For the Romans, used to wide stone highways and well-supplied camps, Germania felt like another planet. Still, Varus believed victory was only a matter of time. After all, Rome had crushed Carthage, defeated Greece, and brought Gaul to its knees. These scattered tribes of Germania? They were nothing more than savages with crude weapons. Or so he thought. Marching with Varus were nearly 20,000 men. 3 full legions, auxiliary troops, cavalry, and camp followers. Their long columns stretched for miles, winding through narrow paths where trees blotted out the sun. Armor clattered, wagons creaked, horses snorted nervously. First, everything seemed routine. Scouts moved ahead. Engineers cut paths through the woods. Soldiers sang to keep their spirits high. But the deeper they marched, the stranger it felt. Villages that should have been bustling with activity lay eerily silent. Crops sat untended. Smoke no longer rose from hearth fires. It was as if the forest itself had swallowed the people whole. And yet Varus was not alarmed. He believed the tribes had submitted. After all, he had a trusted ally guiding him, Arminius. Arminius was everything Varus admired. A man of noble Germanic blood, but raised under Roman discipline. He had served as an officer in the Roman auxiliary forces, learning Latin, Roman law, and most importantly, the tactics of the legions. To Varus, Arminius was proof that Germania could be civilized. A barbarian made Roman, loyal, articulate, and invaluable as a guide. So when Arminius rode up one evening with troubling news, Varus listened closely. He warned of a tribal uprising nearby, a rebellion that threatened Roman control. If they marched quickly, Arminius said, they could crush it before it spread. Varus believed him. Why wouldn't he? Arminius had fought alongside him, dined at his table, and sworn loyalty to Rome. But what Varus didn't know was that Arminius had been weaving a web of lies for months. Behind the scenes, he had been uniting the Germanic tribes, Chatti, Bructeri, Cherusci, fierce warriors who hated Rome's presence on their land. Men who had once fought each other now stood side by side, bound by a single goal, to destroy the legions. Arminius played his role to perfection. He guided the Romans deeper into the forest, choosing routes that grew narrower and more treacherous with every mile. He whispered of danger just ahead, keeping Varus convinced the tribes were close, yet never quite within reach. Meanwhile, Germanic warriors moved silently through the woods, tracking the Roman column. They knew the terrain like hunters stalking prey. They melted into the trees, waiting for the signal. Varus had no idea he was marching into a trap. As the days wore on, the omens grew darker. Storm clouds rolled across the sky. Thunder cracked above the treetops. Rain poured in sheets, soaking the soldiers' cloaks and turning the roads into rivers of sludge. The legions slowed. Wagons tipped in the mud. Horses struggled to pull their loads. Soldiers muttered under their breath. The order and discipline Rome prided itself on was unraveling in the chaos of the wilderness. Then came the whispers. Scouts reported strange movements in the trees, shadows that vanished when approached. At night, the soldiers swore they heard the sound of horns far away, echoing through the forest. Some of the men grew uneasy. They spoke of betrayal, of the gods abandoning them. Superstitions spread like wildfire. But Varus dismissed these fears. He trusted Arminius. He trusted Rome's strength. So when Arminius asked for permission to leave the column, claiming he needed to rally allied tribes to join the Romans against the rebellion, Varus agreed without hesitation. And just like that, the trap was sealed. Arminius rode away with his men, vanishing into the forest. He would not return as a friend of Rome, but as the architect of its greatest disaster. The rain did not stop. It poured down in heavy sheets, beating against helmets, soaking cloaks, and turning the narrow forest paths into treacherous swamps. The Roman column stretched for miles, fragmented, vulnerable. Then it happened. From the trees came the first sound. A shrill war horn, raw and thunderous, unlike anything Roman ears had heard before. A chorus of horns followed, echoing through the forest like the roar of 1,000 beasts. Before the soldiers could react, spears came flying. Dozens, then hundreds, whistling through the rain. They struck shields, armor, flesh. Horses screamed. Men fell. Panic surged down the line. From the dense tree line, Germanic warriors burst forth. Their bodies were painted, their hair wild, their shouts blood-curdling. They wielded spears, swords, axes, anything that could kill. They were not organized like Roman legions, but here, in this forest, they didn't need to be. The legions tried to form ranks, but the ground betrayed them. Mud sucked at their feet. Shields slipped from soaked hands. The path was too narrow for proper formations. Rome's legendary discipline dissolved into chaos. Everywhere, the enemy seemed to appear from nowhere, then vanish back into the trees. The Romans fought not an army, but a forest alive with hatred. Varus shouted for his officers. Trumpets blared, calling the men to form lines, to regroup, to fight as they had been trained. But the forest laughed at discipline. The terrain broke the legions into fragments. What should have been a solid wall of shields became scattered pockets of resistance. Still, the Romans fought with desperate courage. Centurions rallied their men, locking shields and pushing forward inch by inch. The air rang with the clash of iron, the guttural cries of men locked in brutal combat. But for every German slain, 3 more seemed to take his place. They knew the land. They darted between trees, ambushed from ridges, hurled spears from the shadows. Varus realized the truth. This was no simple rebellion. This was an orchestrated slaughter. And Arminius, the man he trusted most, had vanished. As the day dragged on, exhaustion set in. The rain did not let up. The men's food supplies were soaked, their bowstrings useless. Camp followers screamed and scattered. Wagons broke apart, spilling precious supplies into the mud. When night fell, the Romans tried to build a camp, as was their custom. But the storm turned everything into misery. No fires would light. Men shivered, soaked to the bone, clutching their weapons in the dark, knowing the forest was full of enemies watching, waiting. Sleep never came, only fear. At dawn, Varus gave the order, move forward. Retreat was impossible, the path behind was blocked, the ground impassable. Their only hope was to break through the forest, to reach open ground where the legions could fight properly. But Arminius had planned for this. The path grew steeper, narrower. Fallen trees blocked the way, forcing soldiers to cut through while exposed to attack. Germanic warriors rained down spears and stones from the ridges above. The column staggered like a wounded animal. Every step forward was bought with blood. The Romans tried to carry their wounded, but soon the mud and constant ambushes made it impossible. Groans of the dying were left behind, swallowed by the forest. The weather worsened. Winds howled. Rain lashed down, blinding the soldiers. Armor rusted. Bows failed. Even the strongest men felt despair creeping into their bones. By the second day, the column was a shadow of its former self. Legions once proud and unbreakable were now little more than desperate bands, moving slowly, eyes darting to the trees. And all the while Arminius struck again and again. His warriors attacked from the flanks, then disappeared. They blocked paths, felled trees, and funneled the Romans deeper into the forest maze. Varus was trapped in a nightmare he could not wake from. By the third day, the truth could no longer be denied. The legions were doomed. Supplies were gone. Morale was shattered. Cohesion, the lifeblood of Roman warfare, was broken beyond repair. Soldiers who once marched in perfect step now stumbled through mud, carrying broken shields, eyes hollow with exhaustion. The eagle standards, the sacred symbols of Rome's power, were no longer a beacon of pride but targets for the enemy. Germanic warriors hurled themselves at them with reckless fury, determined to tear them from Roman hands. Varus himself, wounded and despairing, knew there was no escape. His army was collapsing, and with it, his honor. In Roman tradition, a commander who lost everything could not return to face disgrace. So, in the chaos of the forest, Publius Quinctilius Varus fell on his own sword. His death sent a wave of despair through the survivors. Leadership fractured. Officers bickered. Panic spread. The legions that had once carried the might of Rome were reduced to a broken mass of terrified men. Running, stumbling, bleeding, dying. And the forest showed no mercy. The fourth day dawned, but the sun never broke through the storm. Instead, the forest remained cloaked in shadows, dripping with rain, thick with the stench of death. The Romans who still stood were no longer an army. They were a ragged mob, armor dented and caked with mud, shields splintered, faces hollow, eyes wide with despair. Many had not eaten in days. Their commanders were dead or missing. The only sounds were the cries of the wounded and the relentless drums of rain. And then the horns. From every direction they came, shrieking through the mist. The forest erupted. Thousands of Germanic warriors poured down from the ridges, screaming war cries that froze the blood. They had been waiting for this moment. The final kill. The Romans tried to form up one last time. Centurions shouted, waving their swords, urging their men to stand, to fight like soldiers of Rome. But it was useless. The ground was too slick, the formations too broken, the spirits too shattered. The line collapsed almost instantly. Spears rained down like hail. Axes split helmets. Swords drove into backs as men slipped in the mud. What little order remained dissolved into pure chaos. Rome was being unmade one scream at a time. In the madness, one sight stood above all others: the Roman standards. tall poles crowned with golden eagles, the very soul of each legion. To lose them was the ultimate shame, and now they became beacons for slaughter. Germanic warriors hurled themselves at the standards with feral determination. Their goal was not just to kill Romans but to rip Rome's pride from their grasp. One eagle fell, its bearer struck down in the mud, trampled as the standard disappeared into enemy hands. Another was dragged into the forest, vanishing from sight forever. The sight broke whatever resolve remained. Soldiers screamed in terror, throwing down shields, fleeing in all directions. Men clawed through the undergrowth, desperate to escape. But the forest offered no exit. Arminius had designed the battlefield perfectly. Every path led to ambush. Every clearing was a trap. The legions were being cut down like cattle in a slaughterhouse. What followed was not battle. It was butchery. Romans fell in the mud, begging for mercy, but none was given. Captured officers were dragged before tribal leaders, mocked and executed. Some were nailed to trees as grisly trophies. Others were sacrificed to Germanic gods in ritualistic slaughter. The forest rang with the cries of men dying in the most brutal ways imaginable. And still the killing went on. Those who tried to surrender found only torment. Those who fled were hunted down like animals. The disciplined, iron fist of Rome was gone, replaced by desperation, terror, and silence. When it was over, the ground was carpeted with corpses. Roman armor glinted dully under the rain. Broken swords and shattered shields littered the mud. Horses lay in twisted heaps. The forest itself seemed to sigh, as if it had devoured the intruder's whole. Arminius stood among the wreckage, victorious. The man once raised as Rome's ally had delivered its worst nightmare. 3 legions wiped out to the last, and the empire, for the first time in memory, had been humiliated beyond measure. Of the 20,000 men who marched into Teutoburg, almost none returned. A handful of survivors staggered back to the Rhine, broken and traumatized, their stories painting a picture of hell itself. News reached Rome like a thunderclap. Emperor Augustus, upon hearing it, tore his clothes in despair and cried out, "Quinctilius Varus, give me back my legions." The empire would recover, of course. Rome always did, but the psychological wound ran deep. Never again would Rome attempt to fully conquer Germania. The forest had become a graveyard of ambition, a reminder that even the greatest empire on earth could bleed. And all of it because one man, Arminius, played both sides until the moment came to destroy his so-called masters. The Battle of Teutoburg Forest was not just a defeat. It was the day Rome's invincibility died. The Battle of Teutoburg Forest was more than a military disaster. It was a moment that shifted history. Rome had conquered kingdoms, crushed empires, and imposed its will across the known world. But here, in the dripping shadows of a German forest, Rome met its match. 3 legions gone, an entire expansion halted, and perhaps most importantly, an illusion shattered, the illusion that Rome was unstoppable. For the Germanic tribes, it was a triumph that lived for generations. Songs were sung of the day they humbled the greatest empire. Arminius became a hero, though his story would later twist into betrayal and tragedy of its own. For Rome, the forest became a scar. They would strike back, yes, but the dream of pushing their borders deep into Germania was buried with Varus and his men. The Rhine River would remain Rome's boundary for centuries to come. Even today, the Teutoburg Forest looms large in memory. Archaeologists still uncover weapons, bones, and coins that whisper of those terrible days. To walk those grounds is to feel the weight of history pressing down, the echo of horns, the cries of men lost to the trees. Some historians argue that this battle saved the Germanic world from Romanization, shaping the very identity of Europe. Without Teutoburg, perhaps German culture, language, and independence would have been erased under Rome's boot. Instead, it endured. The forest reminds us that empires are not immortal, that even the strongest can stumble, that arrogance, trust misplaced, and terrain misunderstood can undo centuries of power in a matter of days. The Battle of Teutoburg Forest was Rome's darkest hour. An ambush, a betrayal, and a massacre that still haunts the pages of history. So what do you think? Was this the moment that changed Europe forever? Or was it simply one of many battles in Rome's long, bloody march through history? Let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. If you enjoyed this journey into the shadows of history, don't forget to like this video, subscribe for more hidden stories of the past, and share it with someone who loves epic tales of empires, betrayal, and survival. History is never just about the past. It's about us here and now.